Hi and welcome to another Titanium Geek video. Thanks ever so much for tuning into this. Do appreciate you taking the time. Normal subscribe and all that sort of stuff. Trying to get to 1,000, greatly appreciate it. Now the reason I'm doing this start is on the video. Honestly, I'm sorry, I use Zoom and I'm totally overexposed myself. Thankfully, Dove comes over wonderfully. You will get loads of good info out of this. Genuinely great info. Do tune in and stick to the end because there are some real golden nuggets that you can impress your mates down the calf and also make your riding even faster. Thanks for watching. Enjoy. Dove from Parkour Wheels, thank you very much for joining us here today on the Titanium Geek.
No worries, it's great to be here.
Thanks a lot, really appreciate the time. Love the t-shirt.
Thank you.
See, it's better than me. My Titanium Geek ones are in the wash, so that's my excuse, which is terrible. So, right, so if you'd just like to explain to us who Parkour Wheels are and also yourself and your background.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, in a nutshell, we launched in 2016 with the idea of essentially filling the hole in the market for a sensibly priced, affordable carbon wheel set, but at the same time delivering sort of the scientific background and data and testing behind the product. So very simply, when we started out, we went out and found essentially the fastest open mold, so sort of readily available rims that we could in terms of the shape, then worked on the actual materials behind them in terms of the carbon layup and so on to develop a product that we were happy to stand behind. So we launched with those back in 2016. And then since then, we've been investing more and more in terms of our own research and our own design work, which culminated at the beginning of this year in the launch of our Strada wheel set, which was the first 100% ground up in-house developed rim profile, or actually profiles, I should say. So we've got a different front and rear profile. So we're now in a position where we've got, I think it's 13 different wheel options across rim brake, disc brake, different types of rim depth, rim profile, for different use cases ranging from sort of the lightest climbing wheels through sort of the new world of gravel riding, all the way through to sort of criterium racing in time trialing and triathlon.
Crikey, all bases covered. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
And you yourself, your background's in aerodynamics?
Yeah, so I originally trained as an engineer, then went and worked for a subsidiary of British Aerospace, so in the aerospace world. Actually fell out of love with that fairly quickly and took the option of going and working in the city for a few years in the world of finance before sort of following most people in that world around sort of 2012, the Olympics and the tour, and getting into cycling. And actually, I mean, they always say that a good way to start a business is if you're your own first customer. So I was in the market for a new set of wheels in sort of mid 2015. Couldn't find what I wanted, so the idea was to go out and make it myself. And it's that infamous question of how hard can it be? The answer is always harder than you think, but you know, 4 years later we're still here.
That's fantastic. So let's just take a step back for the aerodynamics 101, if we like, for
Sure.
the casual viewer. So somebody might watching this, of course, might be a super keen triathlete or time trialist.
Mm-hmm.
Thank heavens they're able to time trial again now. That they understand the importance of aerodynamics, and they probably spend time with Dan Bigham or in a wind tunnel somewhere and getting as good as they can. But for the normal weekend cyclist, why is getting their aerodynamics, including wheels, why is it important to improve your CDA?
I mean, I think on a very basic level, that you've got to think about why we do it and why we go out and ride. And I think for a lot of people, it's that sort of motivation to improve and to sort of better yourself. And, you see it with the popularity of Strava segments, right? We all like to go out and measure ourselves. So actually, if you think about how you can get yourself faster, I mean, obviously training is the answer that we should all go to, but deep down, we all want a few extras on top of that, right? And I think, you know, the very easy way to look at it is that if you're you know, sort of a, should we call it an average cyclist, riding along on a road, then realistically anywhere from sort of 85 to 90% of your power output is being consumed in overcoming aerodynamic drag. So if you want to get more for your, you know, get more bang for your buck in terms of the power that you're putting through the pedals, then the number one thing you want to be improving is your aerodynamics, because it's that sort of 85, 90% obstacle that you're trying to overcome. I think historically, if you look back, a lot of people were very focused on saving weight. But actually, when you run the numbers, which a lot of people have done, you realize that actually, even at sort of fairly steep gradients, that has a much lower impact than you think. Now, of course, it's a lot easier to measure weight. You know, you walk in and the first thing you do is you pick up a bike and you think, well, that's nice and light. You can't see aerodynamics. So it has previously been sort of almost regarded as a sort of a pseudoscience by a lot of sort of everyday cyclists. But I think that, you know, you mentioned wind tunnels, you mentioned the guys like Dan and other aerodynamicists, you know, more and more it's becoming increasingly apparent, and it's becoming a lot more accessible to understand the world of aerodynamics. So, you know, people are beginning to realize, or have been beginning to realize, that this is somewhere that they really need to be focusing.
You know, it's fascinating. I was just thinking about you sort of picking up a bike. It's when you're riding along on an aerodynamic bike and somebody, you know, you're riding alongside somebody, say in a group ride, they don't ask you how aerodynamic is that bike. They ask you how heavy is it, which is always quite
completely
interesting.
Yeah.
It's just how we think. I find it interesting in bike shops because, you know, you pick up the road bikes, you push down the mountain bikes with the suspension. Yeah. And the e-bikes is a bit of a, you know, how fast does it go, mate? 15 mile an hour. Well, how much is this one? £6,000. How fast does it go? 15 mile an hour. What about this one? It's £1,000, 15 mile an hour. So, yeah. All right, okay.
Well, you sort of feel that there is a special person in this world that walks into a bike shop, takes a look at an aero bike and gets down on their hands and knees and blows at
it. Just give me an idea for another video. Right, brilliant. So wheels then.
Yes.
So we've got our bike, and let's say we've spent £1,000 on a bike to work scheme. We've got one of these employers who's tight-fisted, who doesn't allow you to go over the £1,000, and you've got a £1,000 bike to work scheme. You go along to your local bike shop or online, and you buy this bike, and you've got it, you're happy with it, and all that sort of stuff. What difference will different wheels make?
I mean, yeah, so it's a great question. I think that if you think about that sort of £1,000 bike, then more often than not, as a manufacturer, you're working towards hitting a price point. And actually, probably one of the easiest ways to hit that price point is to save money on the wheels. So on average, I would say that for a specific given spec of bike, unless you're at the very, very, very top level, the wheels are likely to be one of the weak points of the spec. So that's why it's such a great upgrade. It's because you can almost go out and you can sort of bring your wheels up in line with the spec of the rest of your bike. And actually the nice thing is that even if you take the spec of your wheels sort of way beyond the spec of the bike, then, you know, as an upgrade, it's something you can transfer onto a future bike. You know, as soon as N+1 hits, you can sort of port your existing wheel set onto your new bike and save yourself that way. So it is a really attractive upgrade option. And I think the second piece to consider is that if you think about the components that will have a noticeable material impact on both the ride quality and performance, I think wheels is right up there in terms of not only where you can find the measurable aerodynamic savings, but also where you can feel the tangible sort of savings that you can feel as well in terms of ride quality.
Okay, and so what about, so for those people who, let's say, aren't up to date, and they think, oh, carbon fiber, that can break instantly. Purely, you know, surely I shouldn't have carbon fiber wheels. I should, you know, stick with aluminium. How can we bust that myth?
I mean, these are probably the same people that will happily go on holiday, or sorry, I should say, would have gone on holiday pre-COVID, in one of the new airliners that are made out of carbon fiber.
Oh, there you go. Great answer.
You know, it is a material that is widely used. It is a material that is widely tested, and in terms of its performance, it is absolutely up there in terms of not just the weight savings, but also the performance and the strength, alongside I suppose, more traditional materials.
Yeah, yeah, and beautiful to look at as well, which I always
not to mention it's a lot easier to manufacture in terms of shapes and profiles. You know, it's no coincidence that, you know, you look at all of the beautiful shaped bike frames out there. You know, you can do a lot more with carbon fiber than you can with a traditional metal.
yeah.
You know, you can get that sort of aero profiling, if you like.
Yeah, I often wonder what we could create if the UCI would relax their their rules a little bit, which would be phenomenal, wouldn't it? You know? Yeah.
Phenomenal and scary.
Yeah, yeah. So right, so in the context of all the different type of cyclists, then, so if we start, so sport, let's say a casual stroke sportive rider, so somebody who goes, you know, takes a trip, rides a sportive, goes out with the friends at the weekend, has a nice social ride, nice bike or not, you know, and they think about wheels. You've talked about the improvement of comfort, the improvement of speed. So let's say good set of wheels with improved comfort. What type of wheel choice should they upgrade to? What you know, depth? What does that wheel look like?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think that, you know, it's quite easy to lose sight of the fact that, you know, one of the great joys of running a wheel business is that, you know, you have a set of wheels for every possible occasion. But, you know, it is a pretty common question. You know, people saying, I'm going to buy one set of wheels, what should I buy? And as with all of these things, look, the answer is always it depends. Because there are a range of different factors that you want to take into consideration. So, you know, you can say, right, number one, aerodynamics. Think about the type of riding you're going to be doing. Are you looking to maximize your aerodynamics, or are you okay with sort of a slightly shallower wheel that isn't going to give you quite so much, quite such a big saving in terms of drag? Secondly, you want to think about handling performance. Obviously, the deeper the wheel, certainly on the front, the trickier it can be to handle in windy conditions. So, you know, if you live by the coast and it's very, very windy, then perhaps you don't want to be going for as deep a front wheel. Equally, if you're a lighter rider, you're going to put less weight through the front wheel, you probably want a shallower wheel. Thirdly, you want to think about the type of surface you're going to be riding on. So, you know, are you riding on Great British tarmac, or are you riding on beautiful continental billiard table tarmac? Because, you know, if you're riding on rough tarmac, you're going to be thinking about running a wider tire. You're going to be thinking about running tubeless and running a lower pressure so that you can improve your comfort. You know, a lot of our customers are triathletes. They need to go for a long run after they've been on the bike. They probably want to be a bit more comfortable. So that has an impact. And then finally, you're thinking about weight. You know, if you're going to be riding up alpine passes all the time, you probably don't want to be running a super heavy wheel set. I've deliberately put weight at the end because I think that actually the more you look into it, the more you realize it is one of the least important factors, but that's not to say it's completely unimportant. So, you know, if you're thinking about sort of your average sportive rider in the UK, I think that realistically, they're not going to be riding up alpine passes all the time. So you can have something a little bit deeper. But at the same time, you are going to be riding in windier conditions. So I'd say you're probably looking at something in sort of what we would call a mid-depth rim profile. So sort of anywhere between 40 to 60 mil. You're going to be riding on British tarmac, which obviously isn't the smoothest. So you're probably, you know, if you've got the clearance on your frame, I'd say look at a nice wide tire. So you're looking at sort of at least a 25, if not a 28, maybe a 30, 32 mil tire. So, and then finally, in terms of the weight, I think, you know, at that rim depth, we know that carbon fiber is going to be lighter. So I'd be saying, you know, you're looking at a carbon wheel set. So yeah, I'd say probably something 40 to 60 mil deep, carbon so it's lightweight, and a nice wide rim so that you can run a wide tire.
And from just an aerodynamics point of view, you know, on some builds of wheels, I should have spotted this on yours, but the nipples of the spokes on some are exposed, and I've heard comment that reduces the aerodynamics. But why would you get some brands that still have the spokes exposed? Is that for a particular reason, or
So, I mean, the simple answer is serviceability. You know, if if you need to tweak any of your spoke tensions, if you go over a pothole and you knock your wheel out of true, then you are going to need to have access to the nipples. If it's an internal nipple, then at the very minimum that requires taking off the tyre, because you're going to be gaining access through the rim. And particularly now that we're running tubeless, that means you're taking off the tyre, you're breaking the tubeless seal, you are removing the rim tape, which is single use, in order to true one, maybe two nipples. On the other hand, if you've got external nipples, it's a 5-minute job because you can get at it from the outside. And I think where we got to was that actually the aerodynamic benefit of internal nipples is so small that it's a trade-off worth making. It's all well and good, having the absolute fastest set of wheels, but at the same time, you and I, we live in the real world. We need to make some sort of real world considerations there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking about the incidents that sometimes occur on the side of the road with an unserviceable bike. That's a really good point. So I've also seen some brands that what they do is, you've got your long valve sticking out in your rim. There's an aerodynamic shoe that sits over the top to stop the valve rattling. What difference does that make, if any?
I mean, we've not tested it explicitly, but I've seen numbers that say that, you're in the ballpark of a watt or two savings. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of very much in that sort of marginal gains area, but as we know, marginal gains win Tour de France's. So I think it's something worth considering. I suppose the only trade-off, speaking as a wheel brand, is that anything that adds additional weight to where the valve is can have an impact in terms of the balance of the wheel. So when you're looking at the rim balancing in the first place, that there's going to be a valve sticking out at a particular point because that's where you've drilled the valve hole. What you don't necessarily know is exactly how much additional weight is going to be put there. So what I would say is, if you are going to be using these sort of aero valve covers, maybe have a look at what that does to your overall wheel balance, because even if it's only a very small additional weight, you may find an improvement in handling by having a counterweight on the other side of the wheel that sort of counteracts that.
That's fascinating. Never thought about that. Fortunately, I never bought any. I was very tempted. So that's great info. So that's the sportive, casual, normal rider just enjoying post 2012, enjoying rather bike. Great.
Yeah.
If we go up one to so let's say amateur road racer, what difference from the previous person, what difference does wheel choice have then? What other considerations do they need to take into account?
I mean, I think at this point you are starting to get more towards that sort of, I suppose, sort of marginal gain element where, you're looking to absolutely maximize performance. And one of the areas you might maximize performance is sort of perhaps over comfort slightly. So one of the things that I mentioned previously was, as a Sportive rider, you're looking at an aero benefit from a deeper rim, but potentially you're going to be sacrificing some of that by running a nice, wide, supple, comfortable tyre. If you're racing, then I think at that point, you're very much looking to optimize the wheel-tyre combination. And that's where you start to look at the way that the tyre interacts with the rim. So I know that there is sort of the commonly quoted rule of 105, and I think that's where this really comes into play. So just to give an overview of that is it's a rule of thumb that was originally coined by an engineer from Zip, who said that in order for a tyre to maintain the aerodynamics of a particular rim, your rim's maximum width should be at least 105% the width of the tyre. So to put that into English, if you're running a tyre that measures up to sort of, call it 28 and a half millimeters, then you need your rim to be at least 30.5 millimeters wide at the maximum point. The reason for that is that as the airflow comes around the rim, comes off the tyre as the trailing edge, what you want to be doing is for that airflow to be turbulent for as little time as possible and to sort of reconnect and rejoin with itself as quickly as possible. And in order to do that, you need a nice smooth transition between the tyre and the rim, and that's where the rule of 105 comes in. So to go back to what I was saying around that sort of ideal wheel choice, I think most of it stays the same. you're still looking at the similar sort of depth in terms of the performance. You might be able to go a little bit deeper because a racer is probably going to be a bit more of a confident bike handler. But I think here you're very much looking at what width of tyre your wheel rim has been optimized for. So, up until a year or two ago, I'd have said that sort of caps you out at a 25mm tyre. And to a large extent for rim brake bikes, that's still the case because there's only so wide you can go with a rim while still fitting within the brake calipers. Now, disc brakes are a completely different kettle of fish. That's really opened up the world of wheel design. So, for example, with our own rim profile on the Strada, which is our newest wheel, we've specifically designed that wheel to be optimized around a 28mm tyre. So, if you're going to be running that wheel set, then I'd say as a racer, you should be running a 28mm tyre because you get the benefit of the rolling resistance of the wider tyre whilst maintaining the aerodynamics. However, I would always say that the impact of the aerodynamics will be more than the impact of the rolling resistance. So if your wheel caps you out at a particular tyre width, I would stick to that rather than trying to chase the rolling resistance benefit of the wider tyre.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Go. Unexpected question. Latex.
Yep.
Latex inner tubes or tubeless?
Well, again, in terms of the actual numbers, they are actually very similar in terms of the rolling resistance. So, a lot of the time when people say, oh, tubeless, go tubeless, it saves you on rolling resistance, that's compared to a standard butyl inner tube. Obviously, the latex inner tube, I say obviously, a latex inner tube will save you a few watts in terms of rolling resistance. And what you find is that if you run the same tyre, tubeless or with a latex inner tube, the rolling resistance comes out very similar. Now, the benefit of tubeless is you get that slight additional puncture protection. It takes away the risk of a pinch flat because there's no inner tube to pinch. And when you're running it with sealant, it gives you a little bit more of a chance of it sealing and healing on its own. The effectiveness of sealants is completely open for debate, and I've had it's very much sort of an anecdotal thing. It works for some people, it doesn't for others. But it does give you that sort of additional chance, if you like, of sealing a puncture. So personally, if I was going to go through the hassle of fitting the tyre, because we're talking about a tubeless ready tyre in either case, because they are the faster tyres nowadays. If I'm going to go through the hassle of fitting that tyre and I want the additional puncture protection, I would be choosing tubeless every time. Especially now that we're getting to the point where rim manufacturers and tyre manufacturers are actually talking to each other. So we're no longer in that situation whereby it's a complete lottery as to whether your tyre fits onto your wheel and whether it actually inflates and whether it stays inflated. It is much more straightforward to get a tubeless setup done. So personally, I'm a big advocate of tubeless. However, I totally understand that there are some people who've had negative experiences or who don't feel confident taking that plunge yet, in which case I'd say go with the latex.
Yeah, I must have personal experience. I run tubeless, and I was taken recently down what can only be described as a gravel road on my normal road bike, and I had a front, what would have been a front flat, and I saw the puncture occur, and I saw it seal, and I carried on going and had a normal ride. It was just fantastic experience.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'd always call the Eureka moment of tubeless, is that once you have that, then you get it. And it's very difficult to go back. But at the same time, unless you've had that, it's very difficult to explain it to other people. So without sort of making it sound like the sort of Illuminati club that people need admission to, I think that, we're definitely getting there in terms of tubeless. I think, as an industry, we probably didn't handle it brilliantly to begin with. There were compatibility issues. There were lots of stories about sealant exploding all over walls and so on and so forth. But I think that, it's definitely getting there. And I think that, as soon as we get the final standards published, which may or may not happen in the near future, they've been ready for some time, but politics. As soon as those are published, then I think we'll be even closer. But actually underneath it all, a lot of the manufacturers are working to those sort of pseudo standards already. So that's why you will notice that, you know, look, if you took a tubeless ready rim and a tubeless ready tire from 3 years ago and tried fitting that, and then straight afterwards tried fitting a tubeless ready rim from 2020 with a tubeless ready tire that was made in 2020, it'll be night and day. You know, it used to be skinning your thumbs, breaking tire levers, compressors, sealant everywhere, maybe not working. Whereas now what we're seeing is that, you know, the tires go on by hand, they go up with a normal track pump. With the exception of throwing a bit of sealant in there, it's no different to setting up a standard clincher.
Yeah, funny enough, we did a video on it recently with me fitting them, and I'm no mechanic. Seriously, I'm a DIY nightmare. It's so simple. I was even told, do not put, in my case, Continentals on, because you will break numerous tire levers, and they went on with thumbs.
Yeah.
You know, it was a doddle. You know.
Yeah.
I'd even go as far to say it's probably easier than putting an innie tube in.
I mean, there's less that can go wrong.
Yeah, particularly latex.
Exactly.
Yeah, particularly latex. So I know when I'm at the track, I always pay somebody to put my latex tubes in. But anyway, so so if we go to the extreme then, for the people who arguably buy speed, and who can blame them, is the triathletes and the time trialists.
Yes.
Oh God, within that as well, I'm just thinking there's a complete difference, isn't there? You know, the people who do 12-hour and 24-hour time trials and the Ironman triathletes are probably different. The people who do the sprint triathlons and the 10-mile time trials. Yeah. But what should they think about when approaching bind speed with putting the appropriate wheels on?
Yeah, so I think at this point, you know, you're at the stage whereby, you know, you're riding a lot faster, first of all. And if you look at the impact of the power consumed to overcome aero drag, and you look at the relationship between the power required to overcome the aero drag and your speed, it's actually a cubic relationship. So at this point, for every time you double your speed, it's 8 times the power required to overcome the aero drag. So at this point, aero drag is now huge. So that should be your number one focus. And this is why when you see time trialists, when you see triathletes, you're looking at the situation where they're running a disc wheel at the rear as the out and out fastest option, and a nice deep section front wheel. So I think that is kind of your default setup. And I think that you're sort of tweaking your preferences based on a couple of things. So, you know, going back to the handling, I would say that, you know, if you're a lighter or less experienced rider, then you might want to be considering a shallower front wheel, just in terms of protecting your handling. Or, you know, if you're riding in a particularly windy course, or, you know, if you're, for example, in the time trial world, if you're on a dual carriageway course and you know there's going to be a lot of heavy vehicle traffic, you want your handling to be planted. So that's the argument for a slightly shallower front wheel. Now, you'll notice I'm saying front wheel because there is evidence, and this is something that we're trying to actually capture some hard data on, to say that running a disc wheel will actually improve your overall handling of the bike. Now, the reason for this is the analogy is very much, if you think about center of gravity, when somebody's trying to push you over, the lower your center of gravity is, the more stable you are. And it works very similarly in terms of what's called the center of pressure on your bike. So by running a rear disc, you're essentially creating a physical obstacle between the wind on one side and then the leeward side the other. So there's actually quite a big pressure differential. So what that does, that moves the center of pressure further back on your bike, which means that at the front, where your wheel is, and it's able to move on its axis, it actually makes it more stable. And I'll probably explain that quite badly, but it is analogous to that center of gravity argument. So the argument goes that if you want to improve the handling on your bike, is to run a rear disc. And it might seem counterintuitive because a lot of people will say, oh, it's a bit blowy out there, I'm not going to run my disc today. But we've certainly got a lot of anecdotal evidence from our riders that say running a rear disc and a deep section front is actually more stable than a deep section front, deep section rear. And like I say, as part of a part of our technical partnership that we have with the guys at Nottingham Trent University, we're actually looking at some options around how we can capture some data around that to show it quantitatively as well as these kind of qualitative assessments.
That's fascinating. So that would be why, I take it then, that some of the Tour de France teams you see at the moment, thinking Israeli startup nation, not running a disc at the back on a normal road bike, but they're running a deeper section rear wheel to their front wheel. Is that the same reason or some other reason?
It's a very similar reason. I think that it's more around the argument that in terms of the handling, obviously the front wheel has much more of an impact. You know, your front wheel is free to turn on its axis. So running a deeper section rear wheel has comparatively little penalty in terms of the handling, whereas a deeper section front wheel will have more of an impact on the handling.
Gosh, that's fascinating. That's great, that is. So what about gravel riders then? So, you know, if you, well, let's say gravel, MTB, cyclocross.
Yep.
They might be thinking, yeah, all this speed stuff doesn't apply for us because we're grinding away through all these trails and all that sort of stuff. So what difference would an upgraded carbon wheel have for them?
So I think it's a good time probably actually to address this sort of myth that exists around aerodynamics and particularly around wheels. And, you know, if I had £1 for every time I've heard this, I wouldn't be selling wheels anymore. I'd be lying on a beach. But, you know, that you have to be going a certain speed to have a benefit of an aero wheel. And that is a total myth. I think the genesis of this is that, you know, if you go back to what I said around that cubic relationship between speed and power, is that the faster you're going, the more benefit you get in terms of absolute watts saved. But then you flip it on its head and you say, well, if you're going slower, you'll have a smaller benefit, but you'll have it for a lot longer.
Yeah.
So actually, it's really interesting. If you run the numbers on this, and the guys at Specialized have done this, this is where their metric of time saved over 40 kilometers comes from, is that actually the range of speeds that we're talking about for cycling, so, you know, let's say between sort of 15 and 60 kilometers per hour, it kind of works to say that you're, as a fast rider, yes, you're getting more benefit for less time. And as a slow rider, you're getting less benefit for more time. But in terms of absolute time saved over a fixed distance, in Specialized case, 40 kilometers, it works out very, very similar. So if you apply that argument to gravel riding, sure, you're not going to be doing sort of road race speeds or even road riding speeds, but you're going to be there for longer. So in terms of absolute time saved, it's probably going to be in a similar ballpark. So that's one consideration. Now, I'm not saying that every gravel rider needs to be sort of going out in a skin suit, because, you know, that there are other factors to consider. But I certainly wouldn't discount aerodynamics in gravel riding. And, you know, you look over into the US where gravel racing is much more of a thing, and the sort of the guys at the pointy end are all on sort of mid-section rims because they are looking to optimize their aerodynamics. Now, if you or I go out for a gravel ride, then, you know, one of the joys of gravel is that you're not necessarily going out to break any records in terms of speed. But what you are going to be doing is thinking about how comfortable you are. So therefore, that brings into play things like tire width and tire pressure. So having a nice wide rim means that you can run a nice wide tire at a nice low pressure. Obviously, that helps in terms of grip and traction, because when you have a slightly lower pressure, your tire tread is able to engage slightly better with the ground, deform slightly more, you get a bigger contact patch, allows you to deliver more of your power from your pedals through to the ground. And actually, you know, you are going to be thinking to some extent about weight, because, you know, certainly some of the slopes you go up are pretty steep. And then when the worst comes to the worst, then you're doing some hiker bike, you want your bike to be as light as possible when you're pushing. And then I think the other element to consider at this point is durability. You know, you're going to be doing some, well, depending on how you ride, but certainly I find myself in situations where I'm doing some pretty silly things. Or, you know, you're going to be looking at riding along and you might be hitting some bigger obstacles. So again, I think this is where, you know, you want to be looking at a wheel set that has been designed with that type of riding in mind. So, you know, if I think about the example of our gravel wheel set in our lineup, which is the Alta, on the outside, it doesn't look dissimilar to some of our road rims. But actually, when you look at it, we've made a number of different tweaks to it to try and make it a bit more suited to gravel riding. So for example, it's got a higher spoke count as a wheel set. That makes it a little bit more robust. In terms of the actual carbon layup, we've said, well, first of all, it's a disc brake specific wheel. So that removes the constraints of having a brake track. So we can use a different resin in the carbon, which actually doesn't need to be heat resistant because we're not braking on it, which means that therefore we can make it a little bit more compliant and a little bit less rigid and brittle, which the heat resistant resins are. So there's a little bit more give in it, which means that when you do drop off a rock face, or whatever it is you're riding off, and you have a big impact, the carbon is less likely to crack because the resin is more supple and more flexible. So it's things like that it gets a little bit more into the nuance, but I think that's why you do see sort of gravel specific wheel sets in these lineups. And I think, to some extent that also applies to the world of cyclocross. I think, it's a good point to say, the world of gravel and cyclocross is so intertwined now that we almost can't tell them apart. But from a performance perspective, I think that the argument holds strong for both.
That's right. I was just thinking when you talk about resin, we often forget as consumers that what we call carbon wheels, or we could equally probably call resin wheels, and we forget about the importance of the resin.
Completely, and I think that's one of the often overlooked things about, when you think about a wheel set is, it's very easy to focus on the shape, the profile, and what it looks like. But actually, you can have two wheel sets that look identical, and potentially even come out of the same mold, so they are physically identical in terms of shape, but incredibly different in terms of the materials that go into them. And I think that's a really often overlooked piece when people are choosing a wheel set, is saying, well, what am I actually going to be using my wheels for? Therefore, what do I want the materials to be like? I talked about the brake track. That's a real sort of hot topic, if you excuse the pun, in terms of braking performance, because 5-10 years ago, if you talked about carbon clinchers, then everybody talks about melting brake tracks. Now, that's one thing that we've really managed to improve on over the past few years, and the way that we've done that is by using different resins. The carbon itself is very similar, but it's the resin that binds it together that has different properties in terms of the way that it manages heat. I think, from a manufacturing perspective, it's quite interesting because actually, when you think about the cost of a carbon rim, it's very easy, again, to get sort of consumed by the carbon, but actually, a lot of the time, it's the resin that has the massive impacts in terms of overall manufacturing cost. Because if you want a particularly high performance resin, then you're going to be paying for it. The difficulty is that as a customer, it's very difficult to know what resin's gone into something because, again, it's not something you can easily see.
Yeah, I always remember my first experience of buying a carbon bike, and the guy was telling me all about the fact that this particular bike had T2000 carbon fiber and not T1000, which I hadn't got a clue what he was talking about. It was all foreign to me. Never mentioned the resin, but it just shows you how people can be espouse gobbledygook, just trying to make it say it.
It's that classic thing of one number, a bigger number is better than the smaller number, but at the same time, in terms of the carbon, the actual carbon weave itself, when you talk about the T numbers, which comes from Torre, one of the manufacturers, is saying that it's all well and good having sort of super high modulus carbon, but actually that's probably not the best option in all situations. In some situations, you want a lower modulus carbon that's going to be less rigid in order to deliver the ride characteristics that you want. And that covers both frames and wheels. So, we would never specifically say that we must use a particular carbon sheet for our wheels. We're very much looking at saying, well, what is the most appropriate material for the use case that we're designing for?
Yeah, I think the whole carbon fiber, having seen it being manufactured, fortunate to do it, I just think it's absolutely fascinating. I think it's a marvelous material. It really is. It really is good. So just look at the Parkour wheels while I think about it as well. So normally you mentioned about, the price points on things. So normally if we went to a standard well-known manufacturer who distributes through, an importer, distributor, retailer, obviously there's a number of people who are probably, who are what's the right phrase? Squeezing the lemon, I think the marketeers call it, of that product.
It's mouth to feed, yeah.
Yeah. There is a lot of mouths to feed. So, with your own distribution model, how does that differ?
Yeah, so I mean, we are primarily direct to consumer. So, vast majority of our sales go through the website direct, which means that we have a very different operating model to a lot of the existing businesses. I think we're seeing it increasingly coming into the market, partly because a lot of the disruptor brands, such as ourselves, have sort of forced the bigger names into it. But yeah, we're very much a more sort of lean operation, which means that we can deliver certainly what, to my mind, is a very compelling product offering at a slightly more accessible price point. And I think, that's very much the ethos that the business was founded with, is that, we didn't want to be delivering a substandard product or sort of a cheap product, if you like. We very much wanted to be delivering a performance product, but by cutting away some of that sort of extra layer, we can do so at a slightly more affordable price point. And I think that actually, in a way, I do remember when we launched, I had a number of people coming up to me and saying, your product's too cheap, which was an interesting one. But actually, I do sort of see where they were coming from, because, it's almost, you need to overcome that barrier of sort of people questioning, why is it so cheap? And I think that's one of the key challenges we've faced, is sort of explaining that it's not through a lack of development work, testing, science, and even quality. It's very much just a difference in operating model.
Yeah, I was just thinking that distribution chain is being cut a lot shorter. Same product, arguably the same or higher quality, but there's just, like you say, less mouths to feed, so therefore it's a better price point.
Yeah, and I think, actually the other thing that's been quite interesting is that, certainly over the last few months, we found that, with all of the disruptions that COVID has brought, actually being that sort of slightly more agile setup has really helped us, just in terms of things like stock availability. We can get stock in substantially quicker than some of the larger operators, or some of the sort of more sprawling operators, if you like, because we've got that business model that's designed around it. So that has been an advantage. Now, don't get me wrong, there are other times when it's a massive disadvantage. For example, we don't have quite the same distribution reach. We don't have the same sort of number of retail partners that a lot of the other competitors out there do. But I think that there is an argument to say that more and more, this is the way that we're going to see the industry going, because people are becoming more switched on, and it is just down to sort of the availability of information that's out there. It's a lot easier for riders to make informed decisions. So I think, the approach we're taking is very much, let's put our cards on the table. Let's say, look, here is all of our test data, and allow people to make their own informed decisions. And if that leads them to ultimately buying one of our products, then great. But actually, if a customer walks or clicks away from our website and they haven't bought anything, but they have learned something, then to some extent that's still a win. Obviously, it would be nice if that helped pay the mortgage, but it is still sort of, I do feel as though we're still delivering something of value as a result. So I guess that's why we like to make all of our data so transparent.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really good. So just to finish then, Dov, so 3 reasons then.
Yep.
So for those people who've only got one set of wheels,
yep,
or a substandard set of wheels, so no, not substandard, entry level.
Yep.
So for anybody, what are the three reasons why they should buy another set of better wheels, or different?
Oh, it's a good question. How do I keep it down to 3? No, kidding.
So I think do 20 if you want.
I think that number 1 is, as I mentioned previously, with a off-the-shelf, off-the-peg bike, wheels are one of the most neglected components. So I think, in terms of the overall spec of the bike, I guess the weak link is more often than not going to be the wheels. So it makes sense, as that's a good place to start with your upgrade path when you want to improve the performance of your bike. I think secondly, because upgrading the wheels is probably going to have one of the biggest impacts on the overall ride experience of that bike. And that will encompass all of the things that we've touched on previously in terms of the aerodynamics, in terms of the handling, in terms of the comfort, in terms of the weight and therefore the ability to climb. So I think, in terms of everything that feeds into your overall ride experience, I think the wheel is a really excellent place to start in terms of improving that for a rider, because of all of those different factors. And then number 3, I would say, because it is the simplest, quickest and best way to make your bike look absolutely stunning when it's parked up against a wall. There is absolutely, I'm a firm advocate that there's no point being fast in this world if you don't look fast at the same time. And let's face it, a decent, beautiful carbon wheel set is going to be one of the best ways of delivering that for your bike.
I think one of the most beautiful things I saw it at the Ruler last year, was a custom made and sprayed steel frame with deep section carbon rims.
Yeah.
Looked amazing.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, everybody sort of wakes up from their beautiful dream when they've been riding the dream bike, and invariably that dream bike has the custom paint job, the beautiful carbon rims. That's what people are looking for. And I think, look, at the end of the day, if you're going to be riding your bike to make yourself happy, because that's why we all do it, it's a hobby, then why not make it as beautiful as possible? That life is too short to ride bad bikes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very true. It's very true what's gone on around here just recently as well. So that's very, very pertinent. So how can people find out more about Parkour and getting details of the wheels and finding out more
so I mean, the website is just parcours.cc, and that's online. We're all over social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. The handle is Ride Parkour. Otherwise, if you've got any specific questions, you can drop us an email. It's just mail@parcours.cc. More than happy to go into detail. 90% of those emails come through to my desk anyway, so you'll probably be getting a reply from me. Look, you probably picked it up. I love nothing more than talking through all of these details. One of the nicest things about being a part of this industry is helping riders find what's best for them. And I think that, this discussion has been great in terms of showing people that what's best for one rider might not be best for another. But, at the end of the day, what we really want to be doing is making sure that all of our riders are on what's best for them. So the easiest way to do that is have a conversation. So,
Absolutely.
Like I say, there's a huge amount of data on the website. All of our testing's on there. I promise it's not just all focused on our products. We've done a lot around different tires, around even just silly things like, if you're running a disc wheel in a time trial, should you cover up the valve hole? People ask these questions, we like to answer them. And genuinely, look, we do go to the wind tunnel a lot. If people have got anything that they're particularly interested in and they've never seen tested, drop us a line, may even turn up in our next test, because, I like to answer these questions.
God, that's a great challenge. That's a great challenge. Well done.
So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
No problem at all.